Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Go ahead, Kai.
Thanks so much, Ishmael. Welcome, everybody. My name is Kalayaan Domingo. I also go by Kai, and I'm one of the staff members with Communities of Opportunity. I'm so happy to be here today with Ishmael and Roxana. They are really the leads and the vision behind our speaker series. So our speaker series helps to uplift new ideas, narratives, strategies that are coming from our communities to build greater equity and justice. Communities of Opportunity is a joint initiative between King County and the Seattle Foundation, and we invest in communities that are organizing and really building power in order to change our inequitable structures and systems. The topic today is about land and displacement, and I think with this topic, it's very important that we acknowledge the first stewards of the lands that we're on today. I want to share our land acknowledgement that the Seattle Urban Native Nonprofit Alliance has shared with us that we use to acknowledge the original stewards of our lands. And as we talk about land and displacement, acknowledging that many of us are visitors here on this land, and we're grateful that we're able to be here and continue to work for justice for the Indigenous and first stewards of this land. So this is shared with us by some of our partners with the Sun Coalition. So we are on the homelands of the first people of this land, the Duwamish, Muckleshoot, Puyallup, Snoqualmie, Stillaguamish, and Suquamish and Tulalip tribes. We raise our hands to honor all of the descendants of the Coast Salish people. We thank them for their hospitality as the first peoples of this land and for our continuing use of the natural resources of their ancestral homelands. We honor the immense, immeasurable, and often unrecognized contributions and sacrifices of the Coast Salish and Indigenous people, and we acknowledge the ongoing disparities, racism, and political invisibility experienced by the Coast Salish and Indigenous people of this land. Thank you for sharing that acknowledgement with us and for holding this space to honor the Indigenous people of this land as we move into this conversation of space and place. Just a few logistics for today. We are in webinar mode, so some of the things that you may do in Zoom are currently disabled, like the reactions and things, but we definitely want to know that you're here. So in the chat, in the Q&A, please participate. We are waiting on one of our panelists, which I'm going to have Ishmael queue up, but if you have questions for our team about our work or about something that's happening in the conversation, please feel free to type it into the chat or the question and answer function. You can also go ahead and raise your hands. Later on, we're going to have an opportunity for people to actually come off their mics and ask questions and potentially dialogue. So you'll be able to raise your hand and then come off mute and contribute to the conversation today. So with that, I'd like to introduce Ishmael and have him kick off our conversation, and hopefully it will be our panel.
Thank you, Kai. Welcome, everyone. It's good to have you all here, and it's good to be here. My name is Ishmael Nuñez. I use he and him pronouns. I've been a collaborator and kind of partner in the CO network for a couple of years now. I work as a consultant, and in this particular effort have been a support to Roxana Garcia and Roxay Productions in putting together this speaker series. I'm very excited to be in this particular conversation in the planning and setup of this year's events. We identified, and largely from feedback from a lot of y'all that have attended some of the past speaker series events, this conversation around land and place and space, and especially in the context of evolving community development and the impact on our communities with issues around gentrification, et cetera. So that's exactly where I find my work all the time. And so I'm super happy to be your moderator today. And I'm joined by Aaron Garcia. And will be joined, hopefully, by Inye Wakoma of Wanawari. I was just telling Aron we might have to do and change the whole vibe of this, make it an evening, an intimate conversation between the two of us. But the other thing that I wanted to acknowledge before we get into it is, as Kai was just saying, this is a webinar format, so you see us, we don't see you. There's ways to engage with the chat and the Q&A function, but actually the way that we set up this particular event was to be somewhat of a conversation. So there will be opportunities intermittent throughout the panel discussion that will allow folks to identify themselves if they'd like to join the conversation, either share an example or story of their own, a reflection or a question. And so I'm encouraging folks to be active participants. I know with the webinar, we might have it in the background. If you're working on something else, we're all in this sort of Zoom world, but I want to invite folks to be present and active participants, and hopefully you'll be willing to join the conversation with us. So great. With that said, I'll just kick off here with sharing a little bit about the event and then introduce Aron, and we will get into it. So the event today is titled Grounded in Space and Place. It is part of this year's Grounded speaker series, where we are building off the last year's speaker series and starting to talk a little bit more about what a lot of this work actually looks like, and in some level of specifics. We are having this conversation as we recognize that connection to land, space, and a sense of home is integral to our lives, and that these places create opportunity for belonging, history, and community. And we welcome you in this conversation with us as our presenters discuss strategies around reclaiming and the making of home in the age of displacement. I'm here with Aron Garcia, who is the project manager for the White Center CDA Hub project, which Aron will describe in a little bit here, which is a place of learning, sharing, and quality homes for working families, and a place created by and for White Center, where efforts to create a more resilient community are centered. So welcome, Aron.
Hello, hello, hello. Welcome, everyone. I'll quickly introduce myself a little bit. So my name is Aron Garcia. Grew up in White Center, but I'm actually from Guadalajara, Mexico. My family came here when I was just a little itty bitty thing. I was about 2 or 3 years old. And I am a product of the community that we get to highlight today. And I just want to take a moment to thank everyone, Ishmael, Roxana, Kai, because I remember when I got asked to speak, I was like, me? What do you got? Why do you want to talk to me about this? And it was really, it's not about me. It's not about the work technically or my role, but it's about the community. It's about the place that I grew up in. And it's an opportunity to highlight and elevate that story. So I'm extremely honored to be here to share a little bit about that. And let's get into it.
Yeah. Thank you, Aron. Yeah, Aron and I chatted earlier this week and described just like self-described as a White Center kid, essentially just trying to do right by White Center. So appreciate you for being here. I will introduce our other panelists, and if they're able to join us while we're having this conversation, at least folks will know who we're expecting. Inye Wakoma is an artist, land steward, and co-lead organizer of Wanawari, a center for Black art and belonging located in Seattle's Central District. Wanawari is an immersive community art project that reclaims Black cultural space and makes a statement about the importance of Black land ownership in gentrified communities. I've been looking up to their work and inspired by Wanawari for some time, especially around this intersection of culture and identity and space. And so hopefully we'll welcome Inye as well. But in the meantime, an intimate conversation between Ishmael and Aron in the presence and witness of others who hopefully will join as well. The way this is going to go, we'll have a couple of questions, and then we'll intermittently invite folks to join in. But this first question is, Aron, if you wouldn't mind telling folks a little bit of more context and backstory around White Center CDA Hub, and in general, what does it mean for you and in the work you do to reclaim space or reclaim home?
Mm-hmm. I'm going to throw in the chat if maybe one of the hosts can share with the broader chat. But just a quick link that highlights a little bit about the work that I'm doing at the White Center CDA, the White Center Community Development Association. But first, I'm actually going to take it back a little bit. So I had mentioned earlier, I'd grown up in White Center. I'd gone to school here, K through 12 in public education. And I think for me, the moment it clicked was actually when I had stepped away from community for a bit. So I was fortunate. I'm the baby of the family, right? And I was the first in my family to go off to university. So I got to study my undergrad at Western Washington University as a young lad a couple of years back. But the reason I share this is I vividly remember in high school saying the only reason I want to go to college is to get that piece of paper so that I can get more paper so that I can move my family out of White Center. Like I vividly remember thinking I wanted something better for my family because they had sacrificed so much for me that I wanted to do something better for them. And then it was in college that I really got to understand the nuances of that feeling, to like dissect it, right? And to like really examine it. And I was like, damn, if everybody from White Center got this opportunity to learn and to get that piece of paper that made you like now super powerful to get more money, then up and left White Center, then how is the community ever going to come up the way I really want, like it really deserves to be? So I think I had a personal transformation where I started to shift the way I started to think, and really thinking, well, you know, if I really want the things that I want, why can't I do it in the community that I grew up in? And it was a complete 180. By the time I had graduated, all I wanted to do was come back to White Center. And it was really difficult because I graduated during the height of the last recession. So like I graduated and like the only job in White Center, near White Center, that I could get was at GameStop, right? It took a lot of sacrificing and trying to figure out different ways to come back into community. And eventually I was able to work at the local high school that I grew up in. I worked there for about 6, 7 years. My background really is in education. That's actually where me and Kai connected for the first time. We both worked at Cleveland High School for a bit, but I ended up working my way back to White Center because that was what I wanted to do, right? And that led to another opportunity that essentially moved me to work at the White Center Community Development Association. And this is huge because I think a lot of folks think you have to have some kind of certain background in the development work that I'm going to talk a little bit about more. So actually, I'll hold off on this a little bit. But long story short, I was very, very fortunate to work in an organization that really enabled me to realize that the work that we're doing on behalf of community, for my community, you can learn how to do. And yeah, we'll talk more about that in a bit.
Yeah, I'm gonna actually get you to talk more about it right now a little bit. But what you were just saying is really interesting because you talked about that shift in mindset, and I think it's kind of an expectation growing up in either this country or in other parts of especially like capitalist centered culture, that your perspective was one that was brought up around being very individualistic. Like I have to gain this attainment for myself, and I'm going to bring my family or those closest to me, but really it wasn't about sort of where you came from. And so that shift into like this community sort of building up is really important. And yeah, it makes me think of a lot of like stories of immigrant families or the children of immigrant families. But yeah, I would love for you to go a little bit and talk a little bit about whether if it's specifically the work, broadly with White Center CDA or particularly the Hub project as we get into that community development conversation, and then we'll go into some of the specifics. So I say you can take it there right now.
Yeah. So I had started at the CDA in my role, really still in education, right? And we were just entering the communities of opportunity work. So I guess this is really to amplify the piece around, in order to do this community development work, we need this kind of support. We need a system level support. We need resources, which has enabled us as an organization to pivot. So instead of like chasing funding and trying to figure out how to do work that is responsive to community, like we're actually really able to bring in community and do what we've been hearing for the last 20 years. So the White Center CDA, we've been around for 20 years this fall. We're going to be celebrating our 20th anniversary. Shameless plug if y'all want to come through. We have an amazing event coordinator who's helping us bring to this party together, but I'll talk about that more later. But for the last 20 years, the community has been talking about how do we create a space where we can convene, So the CDA, we do these quarterly events where we come together. So we do the summit, we do the annual 5K, we do the promise celebration. We had these signature events that we used to do pre-pandemic where we got together, and it was always so difficult to find a space in White Center that was accessible for folks to do this, to do the convenings. And part of our work, we'd also do an annual survey, and this theme of having a space that we can come together was also a thing that came up constantly. So the hub is really a byproduct of hearing from our community for years and years and years that this is a space that we need. So then after hearing that for so long, there was an opportunity really to get into this development work, and we were able to get the support from the county through Communities of Opportunity to start visioning, to start really thinking about how do we make this happen. And that's when my role in the CDA shifted, and I got to really like sink myself into this development work. So we're really fortunate. If you click on the link, you'll see that we're in the process. Hopefully next winter, early Q1 next year, we'll be breaking ground in the community hub, which is going to be a space for us, White Center CDA, for one of our partners, Southwest Youth and Family Services, Health Point, the Yes Foundation of White Center, Feast Seattle. It's going to be a place where all these community-based orgs that have been in White Center for a minute can actually be together in a space and provide services for the community. We're also going to be I think what we've tried to do is we're trying to make sure that this space is for the youth of our community. So we got 2 floors that are predominantly like just space for people to kick it, to hold. We'll be able to have like a space for celebration. So it's going to be a community hall that you can rent for, you name it, weddings, quinces, whatever you need, right? To kick it, have community. We're also going to have a community kitchen space. It's going to be a commercial kitchen where you can come in, and if you got to cater food for your event, you can do it there. But also we're trying to create a space for folks to incubate and create ideas. So if you wanted to do some of that cottage industry like level visioning, if you wanted to make your own food, you can do it in this commercial space because you can do large scale production of food through there. We also got a maker space where we're trying to bring in a 3D printer. We're trying to bring in a space where you can just create stuff. So you can make some food in the top floor. On the bottom floor, you're going to be able to make some packaging to bring it all together. And we're going to have a recording studio, right? And all of these 2 bottom floors really is centered around how do we create space for young people to come together and to create and to be in community. And then the top floor, we got a little bit more offices. It's where their clinic's going to be, but we're also going to provide some behavioral health support too on the top floor, because that is also what we've been hearing from our young people and community. How do we provide more resources like that? And next to this, we got 76 units of housing that we're also trying to develop. And this is the first project that the White Center CDA is taking a lead on. We've partnered with, they used to be called Capitol Hill Housing, and now they're Community Roots Housing. They've done another project in White Center called Unity Village, and we helped a little bit with that, but we weren't as big of we weren't leading the project. This time we're partnering with Community Roots, but we are the main drivers behind this project. So anyway, that was a big level description of the project.
That was perfect. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think some things that are jumping out at me that I think is really interesting, because you started to say a little bit before, you were like, I'll come back to this point around like you think some folks might think they have to have a certain background to get into this community development work. And I think the thing that resonated with me with kind of even my own trajectory is at the like heart of all of this, what is, this project and this work was identifying this like need for community to convene and be together. And then we start to think about what are those opportunities for creation together and co-creation and et cetera. So it doesn't start necessarily with, we want to have a place for a 3D printer, or we want to have a place for people to come together. And I think folks have seen that a lot over the course of the pandemic, of having just spaces to be in community is so important. And we were just talking as this session was kicking off that we're seeing a lot of that going on right now with a little bit of some changes out as far as like public health. And so that's an excellent intro to the sort of the project and context. So what I want to do next is I'm going to invite Aaron to respond to a couple of specifics and nitty-gritty details. I'm sure that a lot of folks that are watching right now, community nonprofits or otherwise, can probably resonate with that same story of communities wanting to come and convene. And a lot of times folks are looking for some sort of physical place, physical space. And as we know in King County and in Seattle and this part of Washington and the region, space and the actual acquisition of space and the site can be complicated. And then furthermore, all the different layers of technicality, et cetera. So I want to invite Aaron to share a little bit with all of us about some of those details. And as we go through them, we'll pause and invite folks to either offer reflection. Maybe you have an example of your own of something that you're currently managing, and have folks come in from the audience that way. So on that piece, you talked about, you had this input, you had this this at least momentum from community and this visioning, but I'm curious about sort of one of those early steps, or a two-part early step, I guess, around site acquisition and then the sort of investment or ownership or the raising funds. How did you all manage that or overcome some of those challenges in finding a place to locate and be, and then start to raise funds to make it happen?
Yeah. I think we were really fortunate because we were, I'll give you the answer, quick answer. We were able to acquire property from the county. So we are acquiring a piece of land that's right next to the Dick Thurno Park. It's currently where the White Center Food Bank is located and where Mary's Place is located, and one of our partners, Southwest Family Services, is located. But it's been where the former public health space in White Center was located. And for a really long time, this space was basically abandoned. It wasn't being used, right? And through a series of meetings and connections, I think the White Center CDA, we were able to say, hey, this is an opportunity for us to get this land and acquire it from the county at a very, very, very affordable price. And it enabled us to be able to do this work because we were able to get this at a price that honestly, we would have to, if we went to the private market, we would have spent way more money. And honestly, it would have pushed us out. Like, it would have made it very, very, very difficult to have gotten to the place where we're at. Like, we would probably still be, I don't even know, probably like 5-ish years, 5-10 years away from actually pulling it off, because right now in this market, acquiring land is so difficult. So in partnership with the county, I think also just really positioning ourselves to be at a place to say, this is what the community needs. And either you do it and we're gonna like put your feet to the fire to the county and you have to do it and do it the way we want, or just let us, the community, do it, right? And I think they were able to see through that and say, all right, they got a point. Well, this belongs to the community. The county, in reality, is they should be a steward of us, right? Of the community, of the resources that we give to them. And if they can't do it the way we want it to, then just get out of the way and let us do it. I think the other thing that's really important that we really like to elevate is that we're making sure that one way or another, when this is all said and done, when the tax credits expire from this project, that this property, this land, goes back to the Duwamish. That is a commitment from our end. That's something that we've said from the very beginning, because this isn't our land either, right? Like, we don't own it. We don't, like, you know, I was really sitting on this idea earlier about how do we reclaim space, and it's not ours to reclaim. So on our end as an organization, we're committed to, once the responsibilities, the commitments that we have to do end and expire, that this goes back to the Duwamish. And that's something that we're really proud of as an organization, because that's how we move things forward.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you, Aaron. I see some folks in the chat. That's an amazing commitment. And yeah, I think I've seen this a lot. And so a couple of things that are coming up as you were talking, you know, you talked about sort of partnership, and in this case, at least with the county, and for folks in the chat or folks that are either adjacent to or working with other public entities, government entities, like there's certainly a role for the collective to be a part of supporting community and sort of uplifting. And I know that, I don't know, we talked a little bit yesterday, and I'm sure you'll touch on a little bit of like community stewardship models and land stewardship models. And so having land that is available from the county, that, you know, sort of the county owns, with this commitment and intent that it's going to be part of this investment in sort of present communities, and then you all making that commitment that it's sort of return back to the Duwamish and sort of the original stewards of this land is incredible. And you mentioned another point too, which I think I've had a lot of conversation with other folks around, which is like there's a lot of power in pushing on political will or political wins with having that community voice and that community story, to the point, like you said, you start to build that momentum. Either you're going to help us do it or you're going to get out of the way because we're going in that direction anyways. And so I think that's a really incredible part of it. I'm curious actually if you would speak a little bit about the funding. I know in the site that in the link that you shared in one of the sort of 2-pagers, you talked about the tax credits, you talked about a partnership with the county around the physical site, but what about some of the like dollars that have come in, and what does that process look like?
That's been, I think, so that's been probably one of the hardest pieces of all this, because I think in order to build the 4 walls on a roof, we have to navigate getting funding from sources that I think aren't necessarily aligned with housing values or housing principles that we're really about. But when you actually like sink your teeth into this, right, and really learn about it, you start to realize that there isn't actually funding available to do the kind of work that we want to do. And that's why we got to start somewhere, right? The CDA has to begin somewhere, create an asset, try to figure out how to move forward, but also realizing for me that the type of housing that we're doing, though it's great, it's going to be affordable, it's going to be way below what people are paying for rent. For me, it's still extractive, right? It's still not providing wealth for folks. But also knowing that if we don't do this, right, like if we don't start somewhere, then how are we ever going to get to a place? So it's an area that I struggle with, because this is going to be a LIHTC funded project. So low income housing tax credit. The commercial space, the community space is going to be also funded through what is it? I'm blanking. But we're using New Markets tax credit. There you go. And we're doing private campaigns. So we're fundraising a lot to help bridge any gaps that are there for helping bridge this. But honestly, what I've learned through the last 6 years of working through this is that even if we wanted to do an alternative type of housing model, try to do like a shared equity cooperative model, we could, and then we'd have to fundraise a heck of a lot more money to pull it off, or we don't break ground, right? And during a time and a period where there is a huge housing need, we need to break ground and still carry that vision of how do we do more equitable housing, right? So I think that's where we're at as an organization. I think we're learning how to navigate some of these systems and politics of these funding sources. I won't get too into it, but I think we could have broken ground even sooner if it wasn't because of having to navigate the different funding sources out there. But we're going to be able to break ground soon, right? And after that, we're going to have an asset. We're going to be able to say, hey, look, investors, we did it once. So now we can do it again. And instead of needing a partner to co-develop, hey, you know what? We've built up our capacity. We have a portfolio. We don't necessarily need to bring in another developer to help us do this, because we can do it ourselves. Like, they provide a lot of support. They're providing a lot of coaching. So I don't want to dog on our co-developers. But the truth of the matter is that we could do it on our own. We just have to be able to prove it now to the people who have wealth to actually believe in us to be able to get these projects off the ground. So
yeah, that's so real. Yeah, it's like there's a couple of things that are happening, right? So there's an immediate need, and so you're trying to figure out the like best configuration, or the configuration that's going to like respond to this immediate need, be on track towards this long-term vision, you know, be able to actually provide all of these different things, and it becomes it's certainly a complicated thing to navigate. You're talking about funders and politics and all of that, those things. And I know a lot of work that I've done with folks around community and sort of culture in the context of like place and place making or place keeping, like we can see that future, but not a lot of times it takes a precedent. It like takes a precedent example and sort of like this proof of concept model for folks to be able to also see it as well. And so a lot of time community are able to have that ability to vision and like build those worlds. And it's wonderful to have folks like yourselves that are like, okay, we're going to go through all these hoops and go through all these challenges to break ground so that we can try and get that proof of concept and sort of start to take things in our own hand, because it's completely possible. Okay, great. So what I want to do, I see that there's some comments in the chat. I'm gonna read them out, but I definitely want to encourage folks, and I know Andron is big on this as well, to join the conversation. So we'll have another piece as we get to some specifics of the project and the work, but on this piece of the conversation around investment, site acquisition, want to hear from folks. I see in the chat there was a comment that says the current housing funding and investment from public funds needs to include community services development in the housing in order for CBOs to create community, not just shelters. And that's another part, I think, of that like world and community building. There is an immediate need around housing in this case, and that physical part, as we're talking about today. But as Aaron was sharing earlier, that impetus of this work with the hub started with building community.
And can I just
real
quick? I've just learned this over the work that I've been doing over the last 6 years, but in the development world, resident services is what they call it, right? Where developers and apartment management agencies, they have this like branch called resident services, where it is that type of work where you support the community, you do the community building events, you try to provide economic opportunity, like a career exploration kind of stuff. Like that part of the world, there's no funding for it, right? So a lot of different like large scale development agencies, like they don't really have the resources to invest in that kind of support. The CDA, we're the opposite, right? We've been doing resident services from the beginning. Like for the last 20 years, we've been grounded in community, doing what community's been asking us to do. We've never really had the brick and mortar piece of the development works. So we've always been a CDC, a community development corporation, but we've just been doing the resident services piece because that's what community has been asking from us from the beginning. So anyway, I just wanted to share that piece.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Ginger, for that comment. I see you in the audience. It's good to have you here. So another key point here from Christelle, like really conveys the point of any impact, big or small, grows community. It always starts within your own. Small changes make big impacts later on in the future for future generations. Passion always leads to successful projects. Thank you, Christelle. All right, so we got a couple of questions. I'll share some of those right now and pose them to you, Aaron. If folks want to sort of just like really jump into the conversation, like Willy Wonka from the audience out into the panel and like participate in the chat or on the panelist side of things, I suppose, please let us know. But in the interim, a question here says, Aaron, you mentioned how complex it can be. How do you imagine bringing this info to a community level? What are the key components to communicate with community so they are aware of why things take so long or why it's not immediate? Thanks.
You know, part of it is two parts. Part of it is just making time, right? For folks to really understand that there's just so much to it. Like, it would be unfair for me to be able to like regurgitate the hours and hours and hours that I've gone to like these trainings and this time. So I always try to tell folks, like, I use the example, whenever I go to a PD, like a professional development opportunity, a training, and then you gotta bring it back to your organization, right? You can't bring back what you spent a whole week learning to like a 1 hour staff meeting. You just can't do it, right? But what you try to do is you try to make sure that the knowledge that you bring is really being brought back to the community and the work is playing itself out. And then you just make time for it. You make time. If somebody really does want to learn more about the nuances of all this kind of complexity around like housing, then you know what, let's do it. And then if it requires doing a bigger thing where it's a community, like part of our community summit. So for example, 3 years ago, right before the pandemic, we hosted a community summit. And I would say every workshop that we hosted had a component around housing and the different like issues that we're trying to navigate, whether it was talking about homelessness, whether it was talking about this project, whether it was talking about zoning. And that was one way where we said, all right, hey, this is a very complex thing. Let's provide smaller opportunities. Let's make sure that we have the right interpreters. Let's make sure people know what they're signing up for, that this, you know, this is going to be more of a community conference and not so much a like a community event. And it was both, right? Like we had fun, we had food, we had meals, we had entertainment, but this was going to be a summit where the focus, the theme was growth without displacement, right? That was the theme for the summit. And we really were talking about how some of these changes were coming our way and how can we get community buy-in on it. Again, it wasn't going to be everything that we could do in a 3-hour, 4-hour session, but we created space for it. Then we created a community council that was helping guide the values of this project. And those were folks who had a little bit more skin in the game. They really wanted to be more a part of it. They really wanted to help with the design and help with some of the layouts and that kind of stuff. They wanted to give feedback, and you just make time for that. So I guess really at the end of the day is really like make sure that people, us as an organization, we're from White Center, right? So we're a part of, like, we can say that we are part of the community, that we're carrying what the values of the community are, because we grew up in it, we could speak to it. And then you just make time for folks who really want to give you feedback, who want to be a part of it. And I found that if you do that, you get the buy-in, even from the folks that are like on the NIMBY side of things, right? If you really make time and say, hey, I know you're not about this, but you want to like problem solve, you want to find a middle ground, let's talk through it. And I've yet to find somebody who isn't willing to like talk through it.
Yeah.
And just on that note, I think being part of the community, what it also allows you to do is to have the informal moments, right? So there's a person that, you know, maybe wasn't on board with this project, right? But I was able to come through during a picnic. We were able to have a couple of drinks. We were able to talk through it in a very casual way. And by the end of it, like, they were on board, right? Because they just wanted to be heard. And that's something that, because they're my neighbors, right? Like, I could show up to a picnic, we could talk through it, and we can get on board, that I don't think an outside developer is willing or even able to do.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. That's excellent. And I know we'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit, in some of that detail, but yeah, what I'm hearing from you is, like, you said it exactly, like getting participation in that, like, problem solving. And so I often feel like folks can actually get around, going back to that point around like the vision and getting around like the future world building. It's like, that can meet a lot of needs, even from the perspective of folks that might at the outset not quite see it or be hesitant or resistant to it. But this commitment to have people participate, make the space, make the time, make it accessible to participate in that, like, problem solving, gets people, you know, like you're saying, bought in. And you know, I'm sure you ended up having like a range of like people buy in from like, I'm going to be a champion of this work and support, or kind of like you're saying at the outset, I'm not getting in the way because what they're doing is really important for the community. So excellent. Okay, we've got another, thank you for that question, Jose. We've got another question here from Sharon that asks, what is the timeline for returning the property to the Duwamish? You mentioned when the tax credit runs out.
Yep. We still got a lot of work that we got to do with Duwamish, because we also don't want to set them up, right? We don't want to, we have this commitment that we've said to them. And if it's if it looks like, hey, you know what, we're gonna make sure that there's space for the work that you're doing at our community center, and if that's what they want, we'll do that. If they're ready to take on an asset after the tax credit expires, then we'll start transitioning at that point. So we haven't been able to flush out that complete agreement, and we haven't been able to speak with the elders about it. I think that's the big thing, that we want to make sure that we don't set it up so that, hey, we've transitioned this asset and now it goes away because of X, Y, and Z, because asset management, property management is something that we're also learning how to do. So we're committed to it. The county and all of our partners know that this is what's going to happen. All the way through the end of this, like, we've made sure every step of the way that everyone knows that this is a commitment that we've laid out. And now we also have to do the work on the other end, which is making sure that the Duwamish are ready to receive this asset. Once I would say, like, earliest case scenario is probably when some of the 15-year tax credit requirements, like, we could in theory do give them the right of first refusal at that point and hand over an asset at that point. But we don't want to just expect that and then mess it up, right? So often people, try to have the best intentions, and then it ends up actually being the opposite. So we're trying to be very cognizant of that. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, thank you, Arun. Thank you, Sharon, for that question. Yeah, I think you also hit that nail there about, you've been explicit and communicative around what the commitment is, and then you will work with elders in Duwamish and other folks in community to ensure, like you said, it's actually set up for success, and it's set up to meet these sort of collective needs. But you all from the outset, because I think there's a lot of these times where it feels like especially for folks of color, folks whose identity has been marginalized, it's like a gotcha moment, and you feel like you might have to say something now to funders or say something now to politicians to be able to get what you need in this moment. But then you really have this commitment, and you all have been very forthright with that commitment, which is excellent. Okay, great. Appreciate those questions. Also see in the chat a link to a paper that was published this month on the funding of resident services and affordable housing. Thank you, Jen Ramirez-Robson. Okay, great. So we're going to move on to the next kind of prompts and specifics and details around how the hub has come about and how projects like this can come about. I'm gonna really encourage folks to jump all the way in. And people are shy, they don't be on camera, and I get it. I'm happy to have you continue to have comments in the chat, but if you're like, you know what, I want to come all the way in, raise that hand. Yeah, raise a hand, put it in the chat. Okay, so you were just touching on this a little bit, and I know that y'all are still working towards breaking ground, but my next question is about how you all have been managing or navigating, overcoming the relationship, I guess, with sort of the space planning, and because at the end of the day, this is a physical space, so we have this intent and commitment around bringing people together, but then you talked about all the different programming that's gonna happen, what the first floor is gonna look like, what the second floor is gonna look like. And so now you start getting into okay, what's the physical design? How is the physical space gonna meet this intent and needs that we have? And so curious about how you've managed and navigated the physical space planning and how that's interacted and looked like with community involvement, which I know you touched on a little bit, but.
I think that was the most important part about bringing in folks from the beginning, because they were able to help create some values or expectations that I think we've carried through from the get. So if you look at the link, the 4 values of this work represent equity, sustainability, local knowledge, and diverse and expanding economy. So that group of original folks actually helped create the framework that we were going to continue on. And part of what we've been doing as an organization is every step along the way, we've always been saying, hey, is there somebody from White Center? Is there a BIPOC leader who can step into this work and do it for us and be in partnership with us? And that's been honestly the biggest thing. So we've made sure that our architect design team, the folks who are the lead on construction, if they weren't from White Center, were they from South King? Do they know White Center, right? We don't just want people who are experts in architect who maybe they're great, but if they don't know the community, if they're not about the work that we're doing, they don't have the same anti-racist values that we carry into the work that we're doing, we don't want to partner with them. They're not going to get it, right? So all that to like say, from the beginning, we've been very intentional about trying to identify and look for folks who understand some of the nuances around like affordable housing development, right? Like there's just a certain way you have to do things, a certain way you have to design things. You have to make sure that it's designed in a way, or else you're gonna have to pay for it in the back end, right? And that's where I think having some of our development partners have really helped build up our understanding of what that means, because we just would have been like, all right, let's design an apartment and like, let's make it happen. But there are just certain ways that you have to do it in order to make sure that your funding can actually be used towards it. And then, so I guess that's two parts, right? The first part was we were making sure that we were trying to, if at all possible, find somebody from our community or nearby and identifying people of color who can step into this work. And that's been the biggest part, because then it's easier to do the community engagement and provide that kind of opportunity, because they get it, right? They're not gonna be hesitant or afraid or nervous, because when you come to White Center, if you're white and you don't know how to work in our community, then it's a little weird because you're trying to do things a little bit differently, or you're not used to having an interpreter and you're talking hella fast, or you're not used to like breaking down and doing different design charrettes so that you can hear individual feedback from different parts of our community and figure out how do you bring that all together, right? So I think that's been the biggest thing. And also the pivot during the pandemic was the hardest thing possible, right? Like I will 100% admit that now we're just starting to get back into the swing of things. But honestly, during some of the major like conceptualizing and like visioning work that our design team had to do, it needed to be done remotely. And that was difficult. And we did as much as we could, right? So we did some of the like the Miro stuff, and you provided opportunities for folks to share and create, but it was never going to be the same, right? And that's where I would say that it's incumbent on us as an organization who is from White Center to really make sure that we're bringing in what we know the community wants, so that we can guide the architect and the design team to really do something that embodies White Center. And there's just a lot of trust that goes into that. And like not beating us. Like I remember at one point I was really frustrated because I was like, man, this isn't the same, right? But this isn't the same because we couldn't get together to share and like break bread and give ideas. But it also wasn't like the end, right? Like this is just the beginning. There's things that we can change along the way when it comes to the design process, and things have to be changed. There are very few things that are so set in stone that you can't like pivot. But so we know that we're going to continue to bring in community to get feedback, to hear back on what are ways that we can modify this so that it still embodies what the community wants. But that's been the hardest part, honestly, is you can't just get that same kind of like buy-in or commitment through a Zoom meeting. Like you can get like a little bit, but it's not the same.
Yeah, no, definitely have experienced that for a couple of years now. And it's so funny because I mean it just goes back to the same thing. It's like this just like innate it's like it's an innate desire, but it really is like a fulfilling thing to like be in physical space and community with one another. And so you're trying to plan this future community space and you're like kicking yourself that you didn't have the opportunity to be in physical space, because there's something about that. And I also just want to uplift and you know, you're talking about with some of the contractors that you were working with or needed to work with, as you're talking about like a physical space design, architects, construction, etc., having that sort of local familiarity and sort of alignment with the vision is important. And that made me think about the same thing that you said in your introduction for folks, if you know, in the audience, especially for like young folks as well. You know, I went to school in sort of with folks who were, you know, starting to be urban planners, architects, etc., construction management. And yeah, if we have a mindset of like, I'm going to get this degree and like kick it, then you have this depletion of like where your community's from. And I mean, ultimately you got to do what's best, but being able to then have folks come back, and so you're a product of that in doing this community development work, and you're able to say like, hey, I have this community around me that has these other skill sets and contributions that can help do this together. One follow-up question that I want to ask. So when you're talking about the visioning and you're ultimately talking about a lot of the programming and the different uses of the space, can you talk a little bit about how either those decisions were made, or how did you all, go from community vision or input or feedback in that loop to ultimately deciding, this space is going to be allocated for this, and this space is going to be for this, and this is going to be for that?
Yeah, I think it's kind of it's an evolution process. So it's something that's kind of changed through the entire process. So I can speak a little bit to the community space, the hub space, and then the housing space. So I'll start off with the housing space, actually, and really in a lot of ways, you don't know what you don't know, right? So I think knowing what we know now, and this isn't a knock to our partner, Community Roots. I said this even earlier. Likely, if we were to do future projects, like we'd want to lead these on our own, right? We were kind of nudged or guided into the direction of partnering with Community Roots, and I think had we known, like really known that we could have done something differently, maybe we still would have ended up with Community Roots. Who knows, right? Like this is a hypothetical, like the metaverse, and there's other worlds where we went in other directions, but in a lot of ways, because we didn't understand the power that we had going into this, we ended up partnering with Community Roots and really pushing them and saying, hey, if we're going to partner in this, then this needs to be different. This needs to be different than how we did it last time, like 10, 15 years ago, because clearly, like, there wasn't a lot of investment in our capacity back then. Like, you kind of just used our name to do some community outreach, and then you built some housing. It didn't really build up our capacity. So we were very, very intentional about, not calling them out, but saying, maybe even calling them out and saying, hey, this needs to be a project that helps build our organization, that helps build our capacity, so that we, A, are leading the work, but B, we're growing that capacity as an organization. And you have to teach us that, right? There are some things about this development work that I don't have that background in, right? Like if you wanted to talk to me about college access programming and the FAFSA and all that kind of stuff 6 years ago, man, I could talk your ear off about that, but I couldn't really talk to you. Like if you would have said light tech to me 6 years ago, I'm like, what is that? Right? Like, so really just being adamant that the developer that we used had to be part of the capacity building. And we wrote that into our partnership agreement, that it isn't just going to be break ground, build this building, and we're done. But there's years of commitment. So when it comes to property management and asset management, we also wrote into it that, hey, you know what? It actually makes sense for Community Roots to lead off with some of that work. And then after 3 to 5 years, we're going to take over that body of work so that we can really manage it. We can do it our way. But if we've never done it before, we're going to set ourselves up to fail. So that's a little bit about the housing space. On the community side of things, we've had the original partners since the beginning, right? So I think that was really like, how do we create space to meet the needs of our organizations, but also how do we make sure that there's enough space so that it's adaptive, right? So we know that the community kitchen and the community hall, that's going to be space for the community to really own and use as much as possible. Same with the makerspace, same with the recording studio. We're going to do some programming. We have some ideas in place, but it's also going to be an opportunity for folks to come in and just use that space and to dream up that space and how they want to. So, I would say about 2/3-ish of the space is really going to be up for community to adapt and to use, and it's going to be open because we don't have a flushed out idea of exactly how that's going to play out, because we shouldn't, right? Because what we were thinking pre-pandemic a couple of years ago is going to be a lot different than post-pandemic now. So that's a little bit about those partnerships that we've had with folks.
Yeah, no, thanks, Aaron. Yeah, I mean, that's definitely seeing a lot of those conversations right now for sure. And I mean, I'm again, part of the reason why I got asked to moderate this is like, this is the type of stuff that I like nerd out about. So I'm like listening to podcasts about like physical space planning and like, yeah, hearing about like how, needing to be able to have design that's adaptive and to allow for like community creation, like even in the temporal sense, like what is it going to be today, even in the sense of might be different for tomorrow, not even in the like pre-pandemic, post-pandemic, but like on the day-to-day. But having the infrastructure and understanding enough from having community input about like how can it stretch to be what folks would need it to be and be adaptive.
Like one example of it, just for the community space that was really important for me, is there's like this like little underneath the stairs, there's this little lobby area where it's kind of set up to like host video games and in a TV, right? And like we've been going back and forth because I think folks are like, no, that's not like, we don't want like that corner. But for me, it was like, hey, young folks are going to need a space where they can just go be by themselves and they don't feel like they're being watched all the time, right? And it's still kind of in the middle. So like, if something's about to go down, then at least we're kind of really there, but we're still giving them the privacy that they needed. And all that to say is it's just an open space where young people can kick it, right? And that was like the big thing. And it really took going back and forth with folks to get them to buy into this idea, because I think other folks were like, oh, well, we can expand this or block it out or blah, blah, but it was like, no, you're missing the point. Like we needed to just have an open space right there. So
yeah,
anyway.
that's a great example. Yeah, definitely having a space for young folks to decompress is important. Yeah, big love in the chat. This isn't always about helping them grow up, but letting them just exist and be young. Yeah, beautiful. Okay, I want to ask folks again. I don't know if you've got questions or comments or reflections, examples, stories around anything everyone has shared, particularly again around this physical space planning or community involvement. Please either type it out in the chat or identify if you want to jump into the conversation. A couple of things that we're seeing. So appreciative to see the work and growth of your technical knowledge, Aron, and the capacity of the White Center CDA to continue to build and stabilize the community to resist displacement. Looking forward to our next speaker series, Grounded in Youth, on August 18th. And yeah, loving the part about technical partners sharing their expertise and knowledge included in community partnership agreements, so needed for community to actualize their vision. Yeah, thank you for uplifting that. And that's something that I've been seeing in these conversations, as well as around sort of like memorializing some of these things in those expectations and in those agreements and working agreements. Oh, this is a great question, Aron. What feature in the space are you personally most excited for? The corner where you get to play video games? What's your personal joy?
That's number two. My number one's we actually have, I forgot to mention this, but we've set up in the beginning on the main floor, it's a tea shop. And ideally what I want to figure out is, can we bring somebody in? Either we can like lease it out to somebody, but I would love to create some type of like community cooperative tea, like co-owned tea space. And for those of you who don't know, we have an amazing coffee shop called Dub C. So I was like, hey, we're not trying to compete against one of our amazing businesses, right? So like, what is something else that we can do that can still bring people in? Because that kind of experience of breaking some kind of bread and drinking something and just creating, I've always seen that, right? Like that's something that we need. So I'm really, really, really super excited about the tea shop. And it's such a small piece of the building, but I think it's going to be one of the best spots. So after I'm done working at the CDA, I'm just going to walk over to the tea shop and work there forever. So
yeah, I love that. No, I love that. Yeah, I mean, I remember like growing up, and like again, it's about like finding space and places to build community, and coffee shops, tea shops is like a place exactly for that. And so that's great. Yeah, you're pushing hard for that. Thank you, Emoji, for that question. That was a great question. Okay, so we've rounded out from the questions we have that are sort of a specific, detail oriented. I'll give folks a moment here in case there's anything else lingering that you want to ask, and then I'll ask Aron if there's anything lingering that you want to uplift and sort of finish and close on, and then we'll shift to doing a reflection and close out for today's session. But if there anyone in the audience that has any other questions, things they want to uplift, ask. I mean, people might be typing. While you're doing that, Aron, is there anything else that you haven't shared yet that you feel? I know one thing that we talked a little bit about earlier this week, were you talking about some of the partners that you want to uplift, or some of the models and stuff that you were talking about? So I don't know if you want to.
For sure. I think I'll share it in the chat. too. But part of what has been really fortunate about being part of the communities of opportunity is it's allowed me to partner up and just learn about all the different resources and opportunities. So I just wanted to give a quick shout out to Puget Sound Crest. They've really been helping lead some of this community stewardship of land work that's happening, that is helping like guide the work. So part of it is just understanding the complexity of housing in King County right now, and then really create a vision for where it needs to be, right? So I think I've been, because of the organizing work that they've been doing in the month, like pre-pandemic, the meetings that they were hosting, the capacity building programming, it's just been really like, and I say this to say, I remember when I got asked to be part of the Puget Sound Crest cohort work that they were doing, I looked at my boss, Celie, and I was like, yo, Celie, I really don't want to do this. It's a Saturday. You're asking me to give up 2 Saturdays or 1 Saturday a month to go learn with people outside of White Center. And I wasn't about it, because I was like, this is outside of my community. I would much rather be doing something about it in my community. And it's completely changed my perspective on that, because I've learned so much. I like to believe that I've been able to impart or give my own feedback into the work too. So that's like, it's been a collaborative work process. So just huge shout out to community or Puget Sound Crest or Puget Sound Sage Crest work that they were doing. I think they're really doing a lot of amazing work. And also, just I mentioned her, but Celie Savusa, she is the fearless leader of the White Center Community Development Association. She is the person who has kept us moving forward with this vision. And it's our vision, right? So it's not like her individual leadership, but it's really her advocacy for White Center and community that has inspired me to continue to do this work. Because there's so many times when you're doing this kind of grind that you're like, man, I could be doing something else, but you get reminded about why you do it, because you have such an amazing leader that keeps you inspired, that keeps you motivated to keep doing it for the reasons that deep down inside are why you're doing it. So just, I wouldn't be doing this if it wasn't for Celie. So I just want to give her some love.
Yeah, thank you, Aaron. Yeah, a lot of love for Celie, and shout out to Puget Sound Crest as well, through Puget Sound Sage. Okay, great. Well, appreciate that, Aaron. I'm looking at the chat. I'm not seeing any additional questions. Some more thanks and appreciation for your expertise in building the Hub and White Center. So appreciate everyone for participating. We're gonna do a little bit of a reflection as we close out here. Before doing that, I'm going to link in the chat. If folks are not familiar with the work of Wanawari and what they've got going on, I know we weren't able to hear from Inye today. Please do not overlook that, and in culmination with all we heard from Aaron, which we so deeply appreciate. A couple of things. One, want to encourage folks as part of the reflection to think about what is it that you're sort of engaging with, that you learned with today, might be feeling today, what you might be moved to do. We'd love to hear from you and hope to see you at the next event. In closing, we want to encourage folks to come to the next event. The next speaker series event is Grounded in Youth. It'll be on August 18th, and you can click the link in the chat that Roxana has shared to sign up for that. There's another link in the chat if you scroll up just a little bit as well, which is we'd love to hear feedback from those that attended and participated through a Survey Monkey. And so please click the link in the chat to provide some feedback around your experience of today's event, and sign up to jump into the conversation in August around Grounded in Youth. Thank you so much, Aaron. Thank you, CO, and appreciate folks for being here. Until next time, appreciate everyone. Take care. Bye.